Hello, hello, check, check. John the Morgal here, checking in with ya. Hope y'all having a great day, and I hope you can hear me, because nobody likes talking to their shelf, right? So yeah, I figured I'd start this one a couple minutes early.
Check,
looks
check.
like we got audio, looks like we got video.
John the Morgal here, checking in.
Stream quality is, of course, bad. So as far as we're concerned, that's about nominal, isn't it? What's up, Nathan Reed? 5x5, damn right, brother. Okay, cool. So, if y'all could please let me know if you can hear me, and if the stream seems okay, just give it a thumbs up. If you can hear me, and if you can't hear me, well then I guess you wouldn't know to do anything, would you? So yeah, man, we're gonna go into some questioning of the standard mainstream historical narrative. So far, this will be about the third one I've done. I did the Mount Rushmore, and before that was Angkor Wat in Cambodia. And I know, the volume, the sound was kind of messed up. Maybe I'll just have to do it again, because it's an important one. It really is. But I think that thanks, Alexandra Lightwater. Appreciate that, brother. Awesome. Thanks, Kelly Hatt, Ron Hagberg. Yeah, Angkor Wat's an important one, was interesting. And, something that I thought about right after I finished that stream on the Mount Rushmore one was the guy that's credited with building it. I'm sure he never touched a fucking hammer in his life, but the guy that's credited with building Mount Rushmore was like super duper high up in the Ku Klux Klan, Freemasonry, all that. And like, really though, because in conventional mainstream narrative history, we're taught that Abraham Lincoln freed all the slaves, right? That's what we're told. So why in the world is one of these 7 high knights of the KKK building 60-foot tall face statues of Abraham Lincoln, if that is actually what happened? I mean, isn't that a bit of a conflict of interest? I mean, if we're going to subscribe to the mainstream historical narrative, really, like, the last person that you'd want building a 60-foot tall face statue of Abraham Lincoln is the head of the frickin' Ku Klux Klan or whatever. Am I right? Right. So yeah, maybe will and savages really build things like giant monolithic pyramids in the middle of nowhere? Do savages really build things like some of the ancient ruins that you fit to see in Panama, in that area around the Panama Canal? And I guess the bigger question would be, did civilizations build things as monumental as the Panama Canal itself? Because here, I did read through this wiki a bit prior to starting. The most researched for any one of these sorts of talks that I've done in terms of the questioning mainstream history. But the thing is, did the ancients actually build something like the Panama Canal? And one of the reasons that took me down that particular path, the fact that here on Wiki, in the annals of Wiki about Panama Canal, they verbatim state that there was no ancient water route in the Atlantic and the Pacific through Panama. So, and maybe I'll run into that as I'm reading through it, but, when Wiki comes out and says that there was no ancient Panama, no water route, no land route through Panama, as if the ancient civilizations were too stupid to realize that this one little separated 2 major oceans. And basically, if you can cut a shortcut canal through Panama, you're cutting off thousands and thousands of miles of sailing around, either that or unloading a ship and then somehow transporting goods from one side of the Panama to the other, and then loading another ship. Basically, history says that the ancients were too stupid to realize that there would be some sort of a strategical benefit like the Panama Canal, and it had to basically wait for French and then, of course, American engineers to complete such a task. However, I will say that in spite of allegedly the largest man-made lake in the world, was supposed by the creation of the Panama Canal, or rather the dam that allowed for its construction, which is interesting in the realm of mud flood because, I mean, hell, we are talking about the largest man-made lake in the world, allegedly, according to mainstream narrative history. Um, but again, really, what we're doing here is I'm not claiming anything. I'm not making any bold statements. I'm just gonna ask some pretty basic questions. Told actually occurred here with the construction of the Panama Canal, a gargantuan undertaking. With what they say that they used 100 steam shovels. No, I'm sorry, 101. There's a couple of little short mini documentaries I'm gonna go ahead and queue up. Hopefully, I don't get any copyright strikes on this. But if I, Nathan Reed, 13.99 super chat, appreciate you, sir. I'll buy you a beer in Dallas next week. Man, I'd love to go. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to make it. Tore up, and it's not exactly the best of times. But I'd love to go to Dallas, if for no other reason than to meet up with the flat earthers, because love you guys, sir. Case. So let's queue up a couple of these little mini documentaries I wanted to go through, and I will comment as necessary. But just to give you an idea of what we're dealing with here with the Panama Canal's construction. And regardless of which version of history you believe, but I'm going to make the case that I find it easier to believe that the ancient culture who's responsible for building these beautiful monolithic pyramid structures is more likely have to created something like the Panama Canal, as opposed to the generic ass fucking 1920s motherfuckers that claim to have done it. Love that song. I wrote that song, by the way. No, I'm kidding.
Panama Canal, 22 years ago. First, we go to the bottom of things.
Now notice that they're driving on a railroad track through an existing canal. The picture that's supposed to be showing you how they built the canal. So I will make that point real quick, that the canal already exists when they've got these rails going through it. Just want to point that out because that is important. You see that sort of thing all the time with the alleged kitchen images and photos of these ancient structures, and even 100-year-old structures sometimes.
We find ourselves sidetracked on the floor of the world-famous Gaillard Cut, which perhaps is more familiar to you under the name of Culebra Cut. Now we are traveling along some of the 160 miles of track that were laid down on the bottom, track that constantly had to be shifted as the shovels dug away at Mother Earth. Right at this spot in the picture, modern Grace liners float on a watery bridge that rises 45 feet from where these rails are. In the distance now, lines of tracks are to be seen, and also one gets an idea of the width of the canal. Originally specified to be 200 feet in width at the bottom, President wrote, TR that was, ordered the dimensions changed to 300 feet.
Okay, I will mention that we've just heard about Theodore Roosevelt in this picture. And, well, let's just let him talk. But look, I mean, this is a mountain of excavation here. A mountain of excavation, and that's just one little portion. Talking about 50 miles of this sort of thing, or like 51 miles. It's ridiculous. And literally, you'll see here in a little while that they've done it like 10 years or something with 101 steam shovels. Like, if you'll buy that story, I mean, just value the story just seems absurd when you realize the scale of this undertaking. But we'll continue.
Costing the United $13 million and well worth it. Local and white labor were employed in the building of the canal. The white labor being called the gold standard, native labor the rest.
So you can already see right here that they're trying to position America far above the indigenous people of this place. So, like, already, whether you believe in the historical narrative or not, agree that there was a belittling of native indigenous cultures and a aggrandizement of white American culture. And if that ain't racist, I don't know what is. So I definitely disagree with that whole sort of thing. But it goes beyond racist if you start to, we'll call it a theory that basically the remnants of this prehistorical sort of ancient culture wiped out. And what is the best way to wipe out an idea or an idealism or a culture than to belittle them and basically ad hominem? I mean, where have we seen that before, right?
Here's one of the native signalmen, the government kept one of these men, flag in hand, at every switch in Culebra. It had to, for every minute and a half during the peak of activity in Culebra, a train loaded with dirt rumbled on its way to Gatun Dam and locks. And it was almost impossible to keep enough empty cars on hand to tax the capacity of the 101 steam shovels used. We don't want to bore you with figures, but in passing we might mention that the government used over 300 locomotives and over 4,000 rolling stock in this work. Now we are approaching the most...
Yeah. So there's your early 1900s excavator. Like, how generic is that? Like, I'm sorry, but if you actually believe that they're capable of excavating something on the level of this with these things on rails, like, really, how did they get it up the side of that mountain to the rails? Like, I've seen excavators in action today, and they're pretty awesome, but they're not stuck to rails. They have to have that mobility. It's makes them useful. I mean, sure, you can clear away rubble with this, but you're not going to do much with it. This thing can only function in the radius boom here, away from the rails. That's it. So, not a very versatile sort of machine here. Definitely a marvel of late 1800s, early 1900s engineering, but certainly not up to the task as monumental as what they're saying that it was capable of achieving, right?
Now we are approaching the most famous part of the Culebra Cut.
And by the way, like all of these videos, you'll see the men standing around doing basic, like, try to find 10-minute work in this whole entire video here.
First, a full view of the cut, showing something of its depth, with the steam shovels biting away at it and each chewing off as high as 7 cubic yards at a bite. These particular shovels are working on the famous cucaracha slide. Cucaracha in Spanish means cockroach.
La cucaracha, la cucumilla, ra 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 ra.
And this slide was particularly annoying and disturbing. It was a so-called wet slide caused by the rains and the slipping of soft, wet dirt on a hard layer of rock underneath. The cucaracha, in October 1907, slid right across the bottom of the cut, buried 2 shovels, and for 10 days moved an average of 14 feet every 24 hours. But that was just one of the many things that came up in the building of the canal that were overcome with little fuss and furor, and all the time the shovels kept nibbling away. This is one of the locomotives used to haul the dirt trains. You might add, as we wait for one of these many dirt trains, each with 21 loaded cars to pass, that the canal has experienced some 20-odd slides, all told, totaling 25 million yards of earth and covering 220 acres of cut and destroying 200 miles of track. Some of these slides came
That was a lot of 200s and a lot of 2s. I'm not sure what he just said. I'd have to write it all down, but I mean, really? Now, if they said it took them 100 years, I'd believe it. No. They say they did it in 10. It's a little more complicated than that, but we'll get into history of it.
In the dry season, and they were caused by faults in the earth, breaks occasioned because of the removal of sidewalls and the cutting of the canal. In short, there was nothing to keep the sidewalls from expanding into the cut, which they promptly did. A few moments ago, we said that the government used 101 shovels. Some of them were left by the French, who, under de Lesseps, builder of the Suez...
I mean, is it just me, or does it seem like they're cleaning out an existing canal? Seriously. Looks like what they did was they dammed it up, maybe that's a whole nother video in and of itself, is that dam up there. It's in the world, by the way. But it appears to me that they dammed up this canal in order to clean it up so that they could repurpose it. That's what it appears to me. But I really don't think that they achieved this sort of architectural feat with the means that we're told that they had at the time. It seems very unlikely that they did it in 10 or 15 years or whatever they say.
Canal first started work back in 1882. These, however, are good old American shovels. They are working here just past the sheer face of Culebra, the lowest point of the cut, the very real bottom of the Panama Canal.
So why did they put that in there? Because, like, I can tell you right now, this video is 100% propaganda. But why would they say the very real bottom of the Panama? What's up with that? Like, if you're making a documentary about something, if you've got it on film, why would you have to say that something is very real? I don't know.
The loading of the empty dirt trains is done very quickly with those big dippers, and don't worry, the shovels always dig themselves out.
Really? On train tracks? The shovels always dig themselves out while they're on train tracks. Yeah, okay, sure they do.
These objects are some of the 553 rock drills that were used for setting the dynamite shots. 6 million pounds of explosives a year were used in the cutting of this gigantic ditch during its 9-mile length. That would make a real Chinese New Year's party, wouldn't it? In the distance
Yeah,
now
more racist innuendos.
are to be seen two famous. Left is Gold Hill, and on the right, Contractor's Hill. It is said that it was from the top of Gold Hill that Balboa first saw the Pacific Ocean. But that
Rocky
was
Balboa?
a long time ago, and, well, you know how people will talk. At each end of that suspension bridge, around 1910 and 12, there were a couple of sizable little communities. Contractors' camps they were. But with the completion of the work...
So do you see the bridges that they were building back then, this suspension bridge? I mean, it looks like Indiana Jones movies or something. Like, I don't know, I wouldn't even want to tread heavily across that bridge, let alone, but let's just continue.
They were demolished, and not a vestige remains of their presence. This looks like a desert stream in early spring, but it's really the to enter the Panama Canal proper, finding its way into it from the Chagres River. The Chagres Basin is now filled by Gatun Lake, formed by the man-made, low-lying Gatun Dam at the Atlantic end of the canal. And once again we view the face of, showing how it looked back there in 1912 at its highest point. They took 37 million cubic yards of dirt out of Culebra, and the cost, well, it's difficult to get actual figures, but the entire canal had an estimated cost of some $375 million.
$375 million back in the 1915, 1930s, I believe, during the Great Depression as well. So a lot of this was allegedly contemporaneous, if I'm not mistaken, with the construction or destruction of Mount Rushmore. So, during the Great Depression, it does appear that the fledgling American economy or the government had the ability to build all sorts of really quite phenomenal things that we can't even come close to matching today, I would say.
Yes, we know that all steam shovels look alike. Just the same, this one is distinctive, for this big brute was the shovel that dug its way through the entire length of the canal.
Yeah, bullshit it did.
End to the other. While the shovels dig, all those dirt trains were going. Gatun. We're standing on the top of the dam, looking south toward Gatun Lake. In the distance, you saw the guide pier, along which each tie up before they are to enter the first of the 3 Gatun locks, through which the ships are lowered 85 feet to the level of the Atlantic. The camera...
If you take a ship across the Panama Canal, you're going to go uphill on the water, as they use, hydraulic schematics or hydraulic schemes to get you uphill, and then across, and then back downhill to get to the other side.
In slow
Not because, but of course because of topography.
Panorama. And on the hill in the distance, the administration buildings come into view. It was in these buildings that all the orders were formulated for the building of the Great Gatun Dam and locks. This bridge-like structure is one of the 2 emergency locks.
Like, can you see, because I'm going to go ahead and say it. If you don't see the contrast between what these contractors built for their own personal use and even, pretty impressive structures back here, compare that to this here. Like, is there a contrast between what the early 1900s people were building already existed? Because I'm sorry, I don't see these little generic people coming up with something like this. I mean, look at that. Maybe I'm wrong, but to me, this screams of Antiquitech Tartarian technology. It just really does.
Should anything regular lock gates, one of these could be swung across the lock in question, and then it would drop big steel plates to form a supplementary gate. And here is a pair of upper locks. Look at the size of it. 1,000 feet long, 110 feet wide, and 83 feet deep. 2 million yards of concrete were used in the Gatun end of the canal, and the work took from 1906 to 1911. Now a clear view of all 6 locks is shown just a few weeks prior to their completion. Here is the other emergency lock. The regular can be closed in 2 minutes, although they weighed from 400 to 700 tons each. And to give you a better idea of the size of these locks, Look at the small figure of the man in the middle distance. There's the Panama Canal from the under, one of the greatest pieces of man-made construction ever known. First talked of in 18, Henry Clay appointed a committee to look into the idea, and through which the first ship passed on August 3rd, 1914, and opened officially on August the same year. The Panama Canal, a monument to Colonel Goethals, General Gorgas, and the American people.
Okay, so let's just consider this for a second. Let's just hypothesize, what if there was something like the Panama Canal in existence prior to these people in the 1800s talking about it? Wouldn't it make sense for them to want to take over this place for its just completely unique strategic in terms of world trade? That the Panama Canal still affects world trade to this day. But wouldn't it make them to want to take credit for it and claim it for themselves? And there is a huge scandal. There's just all sorts of really suspect stuff around it. But again, let's just look at this one more time, because this is the sorts of things that late 1800s, early 1900s people were building. And if you juxtapose these lock gates that can close in under a minute and a half or whatever he said, which is ridiculous. Compare and contrast that. Do you think that the people that built these little shacks are responsible for this, or does it make a little bit sense that the people that were responsible for this sort of construction, these monolithic pyramids all over Central and South America, were responsible for that sort of construction? And I'll be the first one to come out and say it. It makes a lot more sense that people that are responsible for building these sorts of pyramid structures all over the world, mind you, were probably, or certainly involved in the construction of these sorts of things as well. Okay, this is a huge leap. Okay, if they to ship these sorts of manufacture and ship these sorts of giant steel components, or maybe wrought iron, who knows, then why are they building their semi-permanent structures out of, generic wood? It just, there's definitely a contrast here. And there's one more little mini doc that I wanted to watch about the construction of the Panama Canal before we get started.
In 1881, the French began work on a trans-Panama, but by 1889, the effort had proven a failure. But as a former Secretary of the Navy, the brash young President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, fully understood the strategic importance of a canal across the Panamanian Isthmus.
No single great material work which remains to be undertaken on this continent is of such consequence to the American people.
When Colombia balked at the American desire for autonomy in constructing the canal, a brief revolution ensued, and the nation of Panama...
That our nation's capital is in the District of Columbia. Just wanted to throw that out.
With a new government perfectly agreeable to the American demands. America secured rights to all trans-Panama wide swath, including the Panamanian Railroad. Railways would be key to the removal of millions of cubic yards of earth and rock. The Herculean task of actually digging those millions of cubic yards fell to Bucyrus-designed and built equipment.
Okay, so I looked into Bucyrus a little bit. They went on for over 100 years through the late 1800s all the way to 2011, and they were purchased by Caterpillar. But I would say real quick that the etymology of the name Bucyrus has some interesting undertones. If you look it up online, they say that they're not really sure what it means, but maybe it means something to do with beautiful Cyrus. Cyrus was the first, Palestinian society. It's in these notes here somewhere, but here, well, let me just not seem like too much of a fool. Let's get it right before we move on and I forget it. So hopefully this doesn't bog down the stream too much. All right, here we go. Bucyrus is not certain, according to Google searching for Bucyrus etymology. It was given by Colonel James Kilbourne, who laid out the town in 1800. One theory is that the name Bucyrus is derived from beautiful, coupled with the name of Cyrus the Great, founder of the first Persian Empire. Why did I say Palestinian? Sorry. My bad. Yeah, there you go. So, beautiful first Persian Empire. So that's a little bit interesting. A little bit interesting. The etymology of this name Bucyrus, who was responsible for the 101 steam shovels that dug out that entire canal in about 10 years.
The company had just relocated to larger facilities in South Milwaukee. That was fortunate because Bucyrus would be called on to supply 70% of the equipment used. One of the first challenges was to tame the Chagres River. Of tons of earth and rock were moved to create the largest artificial lake in the world.
The largest mud flood lake in the land? Just a question.
Gatun Lake would soon provide hydroelectric power for the dining halls and hospitals and dormitories of the dig, as well as the many villages along the route of the canal. Whatever task was assigned them, those early steam shovel designs proved to be untiring workhorses. The majority of them operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Most of these were 95-ton behemoths, able to remove 8 tons in one scoop. The first to arrive quickly outpaced the railway's ability to remove the spoil. Additional railways were laid, and more 95-ton shovels were brought. Eventually, there were 32 of them on the job. Soon, there were also 28 70-ton Bucyrus shovels working as well. All the Bucyrus equipment was built at the company's Milwaukee plant, partly disassembled for shipment, reassembled in Panamanian marshalling yards, and put to work immediately.
Everyone dreamed of driving one of those amazing machines. But no, we had our 10 cents.
I mean, really, in all of these shots that you see, the canal's already there. I mean, these guys are, at best, cleaning things up a bit. But this is an existing structure. I mean, from everything I've seen, I haven't seen them building anything. I've seen them doing up after something way more powerful than a generic-ass 1898 steam shovel.
With picks and shovels, but we loved to watch them work. They were beautiful.
Bucyrus also provided 10 somewhat more agile 45-ton steam shovels, which augmented the work of the pick and shovel laborers. Like the other Bucyrus designs, they added serious mechanical muscle to the entire length of the project. The 100-ton Bucyrus railway crane and the 275-ton tireless in the constant shifting of 160 miles of rail to accommodate the locomotives and 4,000 hopper cars that carried it. The railroads, like the steam shovels, ran 24 hours a day. Took the massive shovel buckets very little time to fill a train. A new train arrived every minute and a half.
A new train arrived every minute and a half. See, they have to say that. This is my opinion. But they have to say that because the timeline is just ridiculously fucking stupid. I'm sorry. Excuse my language. I know that I'm getting a bit heated about this one. But they have to say that a train came every minute and a half because that's the only way the math would work. And, I'm just saying this because I've looked at enough of this ridiculous history that they try to shove down our throats to realize that they give you these numbers because that's how the math works. In order to remove so many millions of cubic tons of earth, that a train would have to arrive, every minute and a half. But, I mean, do you believe that's what actually occurred here in this clusterfuck of shit? Was it a train came every minute and a half? Okay, yeah, sure.
The length of the cuts were filled night and day with the smell of steam and exhaust, the scream of whistles, and the incessant roar of drilling and blasting. The Bucyrus shovels were hugely successful, setting records every month for cubic yards removed. At Gatun alone, 2 million cubic yards were removed at a depth as much as 300 feet below the surrounding topography, enough to encircle Manhattan 4 times over. For wet work, there were Bucyrus-built dredges.
Wet work, oh my god, R. Kelly was there? Really?
Designs which would improve and one day become a Bucyrus specialty. The sheer scale of the Panama Dig was breathtaking in its immense. There were setbacks. Breaks, floods, and slides often buried both men and machines.
That damned Culebra cut. Just when we thought we had an edge on it, we'd have a break.
Now, one thing I'll notice is these guys are barely dirty at all. Like, some of them are a little bit dirty, but man, I've done construction that is nowhere near as strenuous as what these guys are. Maybe they were all crane operators or whatever. But dude, if you're just picking up 2x4s in the 2-foot thick mud, you're gonna be covered in it, head to toe. And no, these guys are actually pretty bleached and ironed. Maybe it was a Monday morning after a holiday.
Lost some good men that way. Good equipment, too. Well, couldn't do anything about it, so we just kept digging.
The technology provided
So that's how they did it, folks. We just kept digging. Quote.
Cyrus was proving to be the very blood and sinew of a young and hopeful nation, and promised of greater things to come. Despite torrential rains, punishing heat, and rampant disease, the digging went on.
And I hopefully I'll get to it, but there is some interesting stuff about disease as well. Part of the reason that they said was able to complete it where France failed was that America was able to overcome yellow fever and malaria was a huge part of it. But again, that's a little bit strange because the mainstream history disagrees and tells us that the Center for Disease Control was started in the 1940s, so over 10 years after the completion of the Panama Canal, specifically to combat the outbreak of malaria. So if they solved the malaria crisis in the early 1900s, then why did they have to start the CDC to figure out how to combat the malaria crisis later on? Just a question, but hopefully we'll run into that portion of the wiki article because it is just so ridiculous.
And on. Teddy Roosevelt was the first president to leave the country while in office, but he couldn't resist seeing the work firsthand. In Panama, he even posed for photographs while seated at the controls of...
Posed for photographs. Well, isn't that something? I'm glad they got that word in there because a lot of these photographs indeed appear to be posed. Anyway.
A massive Bucyrus steam shovel. Went home, he made an impassioned speech to Congress.
They are doing something that will resound immensely to the credit of America, which will benefit all the world.
So, I mean, think of the political value of this, though. Like, humor the theory, man. Humor the theory to deal with these people. So, what better of a thing to do if you're a total parasitic psychopath than to basically take these people over, mud flood their fucking ass, excuse the French again, and then not only take credit for their engineering, but literally pose for photographs on one of these uber generic ass grandfather of an excavator.
And which will last for to come.
In May of 1913, Bucyrus shovels 222 and 230 dug and ceremoniously dumped the last spoilage, rolled forward and met in the...
That is the only time in your life that two words ceremoniously dumped together in the same sentence.
Middle of the Culebra Cut. After almost 10 years of titanic labor, the Panama Canal. On October 10th, 1913, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, in the Oval Office in Washington, the new Woodrow Wilson pressed the telegraph key, completing a circuit. And in Panama.
Wait a minute, so you're telling me, this isn't me saying that, I'm questioning what this guy just said, but this guy, and he's probably reading off a wiki, Woodrow Wilson, and very young in his presidency, flicked the switch to make this explosion happen in Panama. So, what is that, 5,000 miles away? How many thousands of miles is Washington, D.C. from Panama? Oh, but close to Colombia, so maybe that's how that works.
The temporary dam on Gamboa Lake was breached by a buried charge. The canal began to fill with water. A 500-year-old dream had been realized.
500-year-old dream. So now, wait a minute. It was only first talked about, this whole dream of a, transatlantic Panama Canal was only first talked early or mid-1800s. Well, now this documentary is saying that it is a 500-year-old dream, and in fact, that actually drives a lot better with what it has. I'll finish this one, and then we'll get on with the rest of it.
The globe's two great oceans
The
have been
globe's
joined.
two great oceans. Oh my God.
Despite the worldwide attention the audacious attempt had created for more than a decade, its inauguration was no more than back-page news. Instead, the front-page headlines screamed of German advances across Belgium and the onset of the Great War.
Well, isn't that a bit of a coincidence? So as soon as the paper was finished, then America was deceitfully tricked or, baited into war by the Japanese. I mean, come on. And we all know, or at least I do, this is in the world of me, Pearl Harbor was at the very best a false flag attack. At best. It could have been something way more sinister than that, but so that is a bit of a coincidence that pretty much instantly, as soon as the Panama Canal was finished, well, it's time for the U.S. to. I wonder what kind of a strategic advantage the Panama Canal would have had during World War II.
The work done by the Bucyrus, dredges, and cranes in the completion of the canal was generally unheralded, but without them, the task would have been In the completion of the Panama Canal, Bucyrus and the men who designed, built, and operated these amazing machines had changed the fate and defined America to the world.
Okay, so that's set up for it. And let me just, real quick, before I continue on, I'm going to close this out. Close this out. And let me check in on the chat here. So let's see, are we still rolling? It appears as if we are. Sweet. Okay, let's some really interesting and beautiful architecture in Panama. But we're going to start here. We're going to start with Wiki, right? So, reading from Wiki here, the Panama Canal, or in Spanish, Canal de Panama, is an artificial 82-kilometer, 51 way in Panama that connects the Atlantic Ocean with the Pacific Ocean. The canal cuts across the isthmus of Panama and is a conduit for maritime. Canal locks are at each end to lift ships up to Gatun Lake, an artificial lake created to reduce the amount of excavation work required for the canal, which is 85 feet above sea level, and then lower ships at the other end. So basically they go over a hill, which is pretty interesting feat. The original locks are 34 meters, 110 foot wide. A lane of locks was constructed in 2007, between 2007 and 2016, so they did add on to that way later on. I wonder how much that costed. That'd be interesting to look into, how much it costed to add these third wider lane of locks, 07 and 2016. And I think that those were only for a couple of miles. I'm not sure, but I haven't looked into that much. But I believe that those were very short, the entirety of this. So they say the expanded canal began commercial operation in June of 2016. The new locks allow Neo-Panamax ships capable of handling more cargo. So they say that France began work on the canal in 1981, but stopped due to engineering problems and a high worker mortality rate. The United States took over the project in 1904, now on August 15th, 1914. So I did misspeak earlier. This was prior to the Great Depression, but just prior to it. So 10 years they did this with, allegedly, according to them, 100 of these 90-ton steam shovels. It says one of the largest engineering projects ever undertaken, the Panama Canal shortcut greatly reduced the time for ships to travel between the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans, enabling the lengthy, hazardous Cape Horn route around the southernmost tip of South America via the Drake Passage or Strait of Magellan, and even less popular route through the Arctic, Bering Strait. And I would mention, as a flat earther, we already know that a shortcut to 2 points on the AE projection is always through the north, because the north is in the center. So the more you adhere to the south, necessarily, the further your journey is going to going to be, even if you're not direct route or not, right? So like if you're going from point A to point B on an AE projection map, the shortest distance is of course going to be the straight lines and not the long arc around the outside. And so going south is always necessarily representative of that long arc around the, whereas adhering to the north as much as possible is a shortcut on that sort of a projection. So it makes a lot of sense that this is a project must have for any sort of a large culture inhabiting the Central and Northern American continents. And we already know that the ancients that were building here in Central America, however many hundreds or thousands of years ago, they weren't fucking, and they were master engineers. And so to claim that they were too stupid to realize the strategic importance of Panama, it connects two oceans, to me is frankly absurd. It's not giving these people enough credit, and I would say it would be absurd to didn't have something like the Panama Canal to connect these two oceans, because I mean there's historical evidence of worldwide trade prior to our agreed upon history. And so, again, it is just a whitewashing of this ancient cultural history to say that, America was the first ones to think about this sort of strategic importance of Panama. And wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to go all the way around the bottom of fucking Arc to the other side, right? So, like, why did the ancient culture cross the canal? Like, I don't know. They were too stupid. That's the answer, really? You know what I mean? Wow. I need to swallow or something to drink. What'd you get, my man? Right. So, Colombia from the United States controlled the territory surrounding the canal during construction. The U.S. continued to control the canal and surrounding Panama Canal Zone until the 1970s. Torrijos-Carter treaties provided for handover to Panama. After a period of joint American-Panamanian control, in 1990, the canal was taken over by the Panamanian government. It is now managed and operated by the government-owned Panama Canal Authority. And they talk about annual traffic, which is impressive, but not really germane. So started with the history of what they claim happened. So they say that the earliest mention of a canal across the Isthmus of Panama occurred in 1534 when Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, we heard about those crazy Roman emperors before, and King of Spain, ordered a survey. So he was not only the Holy Roman Emperor, but King of Spain as well. Or, right, yeah, that's what it appears to be. So, he basically was the man back then, wasn't he? It says this fucking guy ordered a survey for a route through the Americas that would ease the voyage for ships traveling between Spain and Peru. Now let's think about that. So it's been literally, like what, 40 years since Christopher Colon discovered America? Well, actually, he wound up in the Bahamas. So it's been 40 years, and already you've got the Holy Roman Emperor discussed through Panama as if, like, how did he even hear about this? I mean, they had just discovered it. They were allegedly mapping the state of California, like 300 years after that, right? But this is like so important to the Holy Roman Emperor in 1504. So, like, here, let's put it this way. So basically, a canal that does not exist is on the talking plate of an emperor in 1534. A canal that doesn't exist, right? Doesn't it make more sense to say that perhaps a canal that did exist was on the talking plate of Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain? That to me makes a lot more sense, because people talking about canals that don't exist. In fact, they talk about canals that do exist. And, like, really? So they had enough surveying in less of discovering America? They had enough surveying of Panama to know that this was the place that they wanted the canal in 1534? See, don't use history by numbers. It's like, if you think about the way that they present history to us in reverse, it's like, really? So they were talking about a canal that didn't exist, that they didn't know what the fuck Panama was back then, But that's where they were going to put the canal in 1534. Yeah, okay, sure, sure. In 1668, oh wait, hold on. So yeah, blah blah blah. King of Spain, yeah, Holy Roman Emperor, King of Spain, ordered a survey for a route through the Americas that would ease the voyage for ships traveling between Spain and Peru. Such a route would have given the Spanish military advantage over the Portuguese. Yeah, I would say that it would give parasitic psychopaths the advantage as well, now wouldn't it? In 1668, the English physician and philosopher Sir Thomas Browne speculated in his encyclopedic endeavor, Epidemica, quote, some isthmus have been eat through by the sea, and others cut by the spade. And if policy would permit, Panama and America were most worthy the attempt, it but few miles over, and would open a shorter cut into the East Indies and China. In 1788, another one of the founding forefathers on Mount Rushmore, Thomas Jefferson, then minister to France, suggested that the Spanish should build the canal, since it would be a less treacherous route for ships than going around the southern tip of South America, and that tropical ocean current really widened the canal thereafter. Really? So the French minister suggested that the Spanish should build the canal. And you have any Donald Trump walls? He wants the Mexicans to build the wall. I mean, it's just eerily reminiscent, isn't it? Anyway, the tropical ocean currents would naturally widen. Expedition from 1788 to 1793, Alessandro Malaspina outlined plans for its construction. So literally in the late 70s, you've got people outlining plans for the construction of the Panama Canal. But like, why Panama, right? Like, I guess it is this land bridge between two continents, so it is an ideal place. But how would the Roman Emperor have known that in the 1500s? Like, it's a stretch, isn't it? Like, they sure did have ambitious designs 40 years after the damn place was discovered, and were supposedly fighting in the woods for 200 years afterwards, right? So that is an interesting side note. In 1780, Thomas Jefferson, then minister to France, suggested that the Spanish should build the canal. Oh, wait, I just read that, didn't I? So, yeah, there is definitely a huge stretch to this strait, and whoever controls the territory around this canal is gonna stand to gain big. Okay? Says, given the strategic location of Panama and the potential offered by its narrow isthmus separating two great oceans, other trade were attempted over the years. The ill-fated Darien scheme was launched by the Kingdom of Scotland in 1698, overland trade route. And so this Darien scheme is something that we should look into. So let's look. Because you know how those crazy Scots, and I can say that because I'm like a 16th Scottish, those crazy Scots are just running around in the 1600s. Like, that is pretty crazy, man. I don't remember ever hearing about that. But so they say the Darien scheme was an unsuccessful attempt by the kingdom to become a world trading state by establishing a colony called Caledonia in the Isthmus of Panama on the Gulf of Darien in the late seas. So, like, if really, what was so attractive to the Kingdom of Scotland to the Isthmus of Panama in the 1690s was a huge barrier for trade in the middle of these two continental landmasses, right? I mean, you got to think about this for a second here. And note the Griffin, which is synonymous with Tartaria in a lot of ways, or maybe Phoenician, or maybe that would be the Phoenix. But the Kingdom of Scotland had Panama in the 1600s, so it's like, for a place that doesn't have a canal, all of these ancient dudes really wanted to build a canal there, even though they didn't even, they had no claims to this land. There were people already there. Apparently, if you look at some of this old architecture, lithic stuff in Central and South America, dude, there was already a pretty thriving, bustling civilization existing there, right around Panama, all over the damn place. So, but like, have you ever heard of Scotland going over, thousands of miles over to invade South American places in order to get a piece of land that doesn't even have a strategic canal that maybe will exist 500 years later? I mean, come on. It's just crazy. It doesn't stack up, dude. From its contemporary time to present day, claims have been made that the undertaking was beset by poor planning and provisioning, divided leadership, a lack of demand for trade goods, particularly caused by an English trade, or this one in particular. Beginning in 1826, U.S. officials began negotiations with Gran Colombia, present-day Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama, hoping to gain a building of a canal. So they're doing all this lobbying, all of these negotiations for a canal that doesn't even exist. Jealous of their newly obtained independence and fearing that they would be dominated by an American presence, the President Simon's New Granada officials declined American offers. The new nation was politically unstable, and Panama rebelled several times during the 19th century. Another effort was made in 1843, according to the New York Daily Tribune, August 24th, 1843. A contract was entered into by Barings of London and the Republic of New Granada for the construction of a canal across the Isthmus of Darien, or the Isthmus of Panama. They referred to it as the Atlantic and Pacific Canal, and it was wholly a British endeavor. It was expected to be completed. I mean, we're talking about 50 miles of a canal through jungles and mountains and malaria and yellow fever and snakes and gators and trees and bushes and everything else. It was expected to be completed in 5 years, but the plan was never carried out. I wonder why. At nearly the same time, other ideas were floated, including a canal and/or a railroad across Mexico's Isthmus of Tehuantepec. Nothing came of that plan either. In 1846, the Mayarino-Bidlack Treaty. In the late 1800s, the U.S. military was very interested in the Panama Canal that did not yet exist, right? So William H. Aspinwall, the man who won the federal subsidy for the building and operating the Pacific mail steamships at around the same time, benefited from this discovery. Aspinwall's route included steamship legs from New York City to Panama and from Panama to California, with an overland port. The route between California and Panama was soon frequently traveled, as it provided one of the fastest links between San Francisco, gold, we talk about that one all the time now here lately, don't we? And the East Coast cities. About 40 days transit in total. Nearly all the gold that was shipped to California went by the Panama route. Let me read that sentence again. Nearly all the gold that was shipped out of California went by the Panama route. Several new and larger paddle streamers were soon plying this new route, including unsubsidized steamship lines owned by Cornelius Vanderbilt. And you don't have to say his name twice, do you? That required an overland route through Nicaragua. The United States initiated construction in 1850 of the called the Panama Railway to cross the isthmus, and it opened in 1855. This overland link became a vital piece of Western Hemisphere or semi-plain infrastructure, greatly facilitating trade and largely determining the later canal route, which was made parallel to it. You know, and I would say it would make a lot more sense that they set up these lines next to or parallel to the existing Panama route, which maybe had to be cleaned out after it was flooded by operations in the north. That's just my theory. An all-water route between the oceans was still seen as the ideal situation. Well, no shit, Sherlock. That's the whole point that the 1500s as kings and Holy Roman emperors were worried about Panama way back then, wasn't it? And in 1855, William Knish, a Manx-born engineer working for the United States government, surveyed the isthmus and issued a report on a route for a proposed Panama Canal. And we use the term properly in this context, don't we? His report was published as a book entitled The Practicability and Importance of a Ship Canal to Connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, as if this fucking got his idea to build a dam. Or no, I'm sorry, this fucking guy is the type of guy that'll tell you that beavers got an idea to build a dam from him, right? Beavers get their idea for building dams from his fucking ass, don't they? Yep. So in 1877, Armand Reclus, an officer with the French Navy, and Lucien Napoleon Bonaparte Weiss Both engineers surveyed the route and published a French proposal for a canal. French success in building the Suez Canal, while a lengthy project, encouraged planning for one to cross the isthmus. And I would say that the Suez Canal, as well as the Erie Canal, are interesting ones to look into as well, but staying on point here. So I just wanted to read a bit of that history. Now, there are some really interesting things that come up in the construction attempts of the Panama Canal, and I didn't want to miss them. I wished I could highlight the important parts, but I'm just gonna read through it a bit. Hopefully, you can bear with me, but there is a payoff to all this. So, the French construction attempts, 1881 through 1894. Hey, would you get me my drink out of the fridge, please? Thanks. Okay, the first attempt to construct a canal through what was then Colombia's province of Panama began on January 1st, 1881. The project was inspired by the diplomat Ferdinand de, who was able to raise considerable funds in France as a result of the huge profits generated by his successful construction of the Suez Canal. So wait a minute. So like I thought it cost a shit ton of money to build canals, right? I mean, doesn't it? Doesn't it cost a lot of money to build canals? So this guy actually profits from building a canal in the Suez Canal in France. So he raised considerable funds in France as a result of these huge profits generated by successfully constructing the Suez Canal. And so like the project was inspired. I don't know, man. It seems very fishy to me. Whatever. I really can't articulate it, but whatever. So, although the Panama Canal needed to be only 40% as long as the Suez Canal, it was much more of an engineering challenge due to the combination of tropical rainforests, debilitating climate, the need for canal locks, and the lack of any ancient route to follow. Well, there it is. There's the $1 million I wanted to point out here, and I'm glad that I read that through. Because when Wiki makes a point to say there was no ancient route, well, guess what? The first thing I'm looking for is an ancient route. And really, just a cursory examination of the area shows that there was all sorts of errors and ancient roadways and what appeared to be like step pyramid structures on either sides of the canal. So we'll get into it, but for them to say that there was no ancient route to follow, you mean the ancient route that the King of Spain didn't know about in the early 1500s? That ancient route that didn't exist, right? Okay. So it says de Lesseps wanted a sea level canal like the Suez, but he visited the site only a few times during the dry season, which lasts only 4 months of the year. His men were totally unprepared for the rainy season. During his river, the Chagres River, where the canal started, became a raging torrent, raising up 10 meters or 35 feet. Now that is a seasonal rise for a river, let me tell you. For a river to rise and fall 35 feet from, basically rainy season to dry season, that's pretty amazing. So like these guys knew that they definitely wanted to put a canal that didn't exist in this particular spot, but they didn't even know they had a fucking rainy season? Like really? So that was their plan since the 1500s when the Holy Roman decided about this canal that didn't exist back then. He had never seen it. He had never surveyed it, but that's where they decided that they wanted this canal. A place where it raises 35 feet in the rainy season? Really? Okay. Like what to say. So it says the dense jungle was alive with venomous snakes, insects, and spiders. But the worst challenges were yellow fever, malaria, and other tropical diseases, which killed thousands of workers by 1884, where the death rate was over 200 men per month. Public health measures were ineffective because of the role of the mosquito as a disease vector was then unknown. So they're going to do this canal, and they didn't even know about encephalitis. Conditions were downplayed in France to avoid recruitment problems, but the high mortality rate made it difficult to maintain an experienced workforce. So they basically did this with day laborers, bro. Yeah, sure they did. They did it with an inexperienced workforce and just American grit, because the American grit is gold standard and indigenous grit is subpar. according to a documentary that we watched, wasn't it? Yep. It says workers had to continually widen the main cut through the mountain at Culebra and reduce the angles of the slopes to minimize landslides into the canal. So it wasn't just 50 miles in a straight line. No, they had to keep going back and re-sloping basically like create a retaining wall to prevent mudslides and wrecking the work that they had just done. So, the claim that they did this in 10 years to me is just getting more and more far-fetched with every word that you read about the alleged history here. It says steam shovels were used in the construction of the canal, purchased from Bay City Industrial Works, a business owned by William L. Clements in Bay City, Michigan. And again, this is still the French construction attempts in the late 1800s. This is before Bucyrus even got with their state-of-the-art steam-powered shovels, right? So it says bucket chain excavators manufactured Alphonse Couvreau and Wire and Richmond and Butte were also used. Other mechanical and electrical equipment was limited in capabilities, and steel equipment, guess what steel equipment did? It rusted rapidly in the rainy climate. So, yeah. So basically what they're getting at is the French gave up on the canal that didn't exist. In France, de Lesseps kept the investment and supply of workers flowing long after it was obvious that the targets were not being met, but eventually the money ran out. The French effort went bankrupt in 1889 after reportedly spending $287 million. This is prior to 1900, so this is way more than a quarter of $1 billion, folks. Way, way more. Multiply that by 20. Multiply that by 25. An idea. It says an estimated 22,000 men died from disease and accidents, and the savings of 800,000 investors were lost. The work was suspended on May 15th, and the ensuing scandal known as the Panama Affair. Some of those deemed responsible were prosecuting Gustave Eiffel of Tower fame. But so let's look into this Panama Affair. And you guys are going to have to excuse me, but I have to use the restroom real quick. So bear with me 1 second, and I shall be right back. Sorry, you guys. Okay, where were we? Yeah, so 1,000 men died during just the French construction attempts, according to this narrative. And yeah, Gustave Eiffel. So here we go. Yeah, the Panama scandals. Okay, so let's look into this a bit. This is a bit of a sidetrack, but it is important. The Panama scandals, also known as the Panama Canal scandal or Panama Affair, an affair that broke out in the French Third Republic in 1892, linked to a French company's failed building attempt at constructing a Panama Canal. Close to $500 million francs were lost, and members of the French government had taken bribes to keep quiet about Panama Canal Company's finance in what is regarded as the largest monetary corruption scandal of the 19th century. So, but there are some names in here tied to this scandal. That was really just what I wanted to mention was, Gustave Eiffel of Eiffel. He got indicted in this and he was actually sentenced to jail, but he was later got that sentence annulled. says in the bribery trial, the former city developer minister Bethaudt received 5 years in prison, of which he served 3 years. Baron Reinach, the financial advisor of the canal company and agent for the various bribes, well, he killed himself. Other defendants fled to England. Politicians' involvement included Leon Bourgeois, who was his ideas influenced the Radical Party regarding a wide range of issues, promoted progressive taxation such as progressive income taxes and social insurance schemes, along with economic equality. Blah. Alfred Joseph Niquet. So, but there was presidents and Eiffels and different historical characters involved in this scandal. Basically, a large number of these ministers were accused by French nationalists of taking bribes from Lesseps in 1888 to permit the stock usage, leading to a corruption trial against Lesseps and his son Charles. Meanwhile, 510 members of parliament, including 6 ministers, were accused of receiving bribes from the Panama Canal Company to hide the company's financial status from the public. So this is involved in the scandal with the French construction of the Panama Canal. There was a cover-up, there was bribes, there was some sort of a deception going in Panama where, well, basically $500 million francs were basically lost in the scheme. So, it certainly does not stop stinking just with the cursory overview of this topic, now does it? So let's keep going here, back with the original article. In 1894, a second French company, the Compagnie Nouvelle des Canaux, was created to take over the project. A minimal workforce of a few thousand people was employed primarily to comply with the terms of the Colombian-Panama to run the Panama Railroad and to maintain the existing excavation and equipment in sellable condition. The company sought a buyer with an asking price of $109 million. So they lost their investors $500 million francs. They're going to sell it off for $109 million. Somebody's getting screwed here. I'm sorry, but somebody's getting screwed here. I'm just saying. In the meantime, they continued with enough activity to maintain their franchise. So keep on going. So it says the United States acquisition. At this time, the President and the Senate of the United States were interested in establishing a canal that still did not yet exist across the isthmus, with some favoring a canal across Nicaragua and others advocating the purchase of the French interests in Panama. Boys seeking American involvement asked for $100 million, but accepted a measly $40 million in the face of the Nicaraguan option. They were hedging their bets, they were leveraging this guy, and they basically dicked him down to 40% of what they originally asked. So in June of 1902, the U.S. Senate voted in favor of the Spooner Act, I've got back, to pursue the Panamanian option, provided the necessary right. So there's some other interesting and good stuff I wanted to cover in this section before we keep going. Let me just try to scan ahead a bit, because I don't want to bore you guys to death. It says President Roosevelt changed tactics based in part on the Mayorino-Bidlack Treaty of 1846 and actively supported Panama from Colombia. So they basically, this is like the beginning of, memoirs of an economic hitman or whatever, right? Basically got Panama to secede from Colombia, which Panama was part of Colombia. They basically enticed Panama with becoming its own sovereign if they would but allow the Americans to take over the Panama Canal project that still did not yet exist. Then America would basically back them, right? In 1903, U.S. warships blocked sea lanes against possible Colombian troop movements en route to Panama Rebellion. Panama declared independence on November 3rd, 1903. The United States quickly recognized them as a new nation. On November 6, 1903, Felipe Bonavarea, as Panama's ambassador to the United States, signed the Hay-Bonavarea Treaty, granting rights to the United States to build and indefinitely administer the Canal Zone and its defenses. This is sometimes misinterpreted as the 99-year lease because of misleading wording included in Article 22 of the agreement. Almost immediately, the treaty was condemned by many Panamanians as an infringement on their country's new national sovereignty. This would later become a contentious diplomatic issue among Colombia, Panama, and the United States. And of course it was, especially if you consider perhaps the history that we're being fed is not 100% legit. Okay. President Roosevelt famously stated, "I took the isthmus, started the canal, and then left Congress not to debate the canal. Me." Several parties in the United States called this an act of war on Colombia, and that's exactly what I would call it as well. The New York Times described the support given by the United States as an act of sordid conquest. The New York Evening Post called it a vulgar and mercenary venture. The U.S. maneuvers are often cited as the classic example of U.S. gunboat diplomacy in Latin America, and the best illustrates Roosevelt meant by the old African adage, quote, "Speak softly and carry a big stick, and you will go far," end quote. After the Revolution, the Republic of Panama became a U.S. protectorate until 1939. Okay, so let's get into, well, hold on. We'll finish up the French endeavors here. In 1904, the United States purchased the French equipment and nations, including the Panama Railroad, for $40 million a steal, I would say, of which $30 million to excavations completed, primarily in the Gallard Cut, then called the Culebra Cut, valued for about $1 per cubic yard. The United States also paid the new country of Panama $10 million and a $250,000 payment each year following. So they basically got it for a song, didn't they? In 1921, Colombia and the United States entered into the Russia Treaty, in which the United States agreed to pay Colombia $25 million, $5 million upon ratification, and $5 million, and grant Colombia special privileges in the Canal Zone. In return, Colombia recognized Panama as an independent nation. So basically, the United States more or less bought Panama from Colombia, is what they're saying. But the Panamanians didn't really like it, especially when they started trying to overstep their boundaries, didn't they? Right, so the United States construction of the Panama Canal. This is what I'm really interested in and wanted to focus on a bit, and we've got tons of other stuff, so I'm going to try to breeze through this a bit. But there is some good stuff in here, and there is a payoff to all this, I promise. So it says the U.S. formally took control of the canal property on May 4th, 1904, inheriting from the French a depleted workforce and a buildings, infrastructure, and equipment, much of it in poor condition. A U.S. government commission, the Isthmian Canal Commission, or the ICC, was established to oversee the construction. It was given control of the Panama Zone, over which the United States exercised sovereignty. The commission directly to the Secretary of War, William Howard Taft, and was directed to avoid the inefficiency and corruption that had plagued the French 15 years earlier. Well, if you've got politicians and bureaucrats to avoid inefficiency and corruption, then let me tell you, you're looking for love in all the wrong places there, Garth Funkel. So on May 6, 1904, President Theodore Roosevelt appointed John Finley Wallace, finally general manager of the Illinois Central Railroad, as chief engineer of the Panama Canal project. Overwhelmed by the disease, plague, and forced to use often dilapidated French infrastructure and equipment, as well as being frustrated by the overly bureaucratic ICC, Wallace resigned abruptly in June of 1905. So he wasn't even there a year. He was succeeded by John Frank Stevens, a self-educated engineer. Yeah, put that on your resume today. Yeah, you want to go build the most monumental canal ever in history? I'm a self-educated engineer. Yeah, you'll get the job, I'm sure. Says he had built the Great Northern Railroad. Stevens was not a mixture needed by the thousands of incoming workers. So it's like, yeah, not only did you have to build the canal in 10 years and do all Herculean monumental tasks that could probably not be done for $10 quadrillion today, but no, you had to build houses and cafeterias and hotels and repair shops. I mean, this was big, y'all. But of course, they just did all this in 10 years and got him for United States entering into World War II. Isn't that a coinkydink? Isn't it? It says Stevens began the recruitment effort to entice thousands of workers from the United States and other areas to come to the Canal Zone to work, and tried to provide accommodation in which the workers could work and live in reasonable safety and comfort. And by the way, when they say reasonable safety and comfort, they're talking about in the middle of nowhere, in the jungle, with lions and tigers and bears and snakes and malaria and fever and Montezuma's revenge and, just name it. So when they say safety and comfort, they're using those terms loosely as well, I might say, in my opinion. He also reestablished, which was to prove crucial in transporting millions of tons of soil from the cut through the mountains to the dam across the Chagres River. And then they talk about the chief sanitation officer. I don't think there was much in here, but of course, oh no, here, yeah, there actually is here. So yeah, this important actually. I'm glad I didn't skip it. So it says Colonel William C. Gorges had been appointed chief sanitation officer of the Canal Construction Project 4. Gorges implemented a range of measures to minimize the spread of deadly diseases, particularly yellow fever and malaria. Have been shown to be mosquito-borne following the work of Carlos Finley and Dr. Walter Reed. Investment was made in extensive sanitation projects in 1904, according to this. But again, as I mentioned before, the CDC was set up in like the 1940s in order to try to combat the outbreak of American malaria. So let me make sure I've got these dates right. I've got it somewhere, but no. Well, I guess I got to redo it. Let's just see. It's pretty easy to find. When was malaria first cured? It says here, if you Google search when was malaria first cured, it says CDC's mission to combat malaria began at its inception on July 1st, 1940, 30 plus years after the completion of the Panama Canal, people, where they allegedly beat the shit out of malaria 50 years earlier or whatever. The Communicable Disease Center, CDC, was first known, stemmed from the MCWA. This much of the early work done by the CDC was concentrated on the control and of malaria in the United States. So here we go, a pretty glaring discrepancy in these timelines here, people. I'm just saying, they're talking out of both sides of their mouth in this conventional history nonsense, yo. I'm not even playing with you, man. Here they say that mosquito spread diseases were nearly eliminated in 1904. Well, then what the hell is CDC 41 years later? I mean, come on, really? Huh. Maybe I'm missing something here, but and always deal in such generalities. But this is a bit of a discrepancy as far as I can tell, just at first glance, man. So there, you could just read on for hours here, but I wanted to get into to some of this other stuff too, because it seems like we've been going on here for a little bit. I don't want to just death. But okay, we'll skip ahead and maybe we'll come back to the wiki. But just looking at some of the architecture in Panama, definite signs of very, very old antiquitech architecture, Greco-Roman cathedrals and churches, and yes, even what appears to me to be the remnants of a star fort by the coast, mud flooding, the whole nine, obelisks, and this whole shtick about the ancients not having a water-based pass from the Atlantic to Panama just seems absurd to me, because again, that there is a pretty immense strategic importance to such a thing there. To claim that these ancient cultures were just too stupid to realize that, to me, is an insult to them. But definitely what appears to be super ancient as well as semi-ancient, like Tartarian structures also. And Central and South America are certainly no strangers to things like pyramids and monoliths and obelisks and all of that good stuff. So, moving right along. Sorry, this computer doesn't want to load. Let me close that anymore. Load. All right. So here we go. This was another little. It's the name of the video. Panama Canal, full transit in 5 minutes. Cruzando el Canal de Panama. And of course, it's going to read. But as you can see where I stopped it here, there appears to be a step-style pyramid right there on the side of. Maybe they're going to claim that's where they were doing excavations or whatever. But very, very reminiscent of a pyramid. Hopefully we'll see it here. I might have to back it up again. Let's see. Yeah, I think that was it there. Yeah, right here. So let's back it up to here. Okay, here we go. What is that? See, I wouldn't even let me pause it. There, what appear to be very ancient pyramid structures, although it could be remnants of whatever excavation was done there. We do know that they tended, this worldwide ancient civilization did tend to build pyramids right on the edge of existing canals. So let's close that one. Yeah, and here's another look at something similar. This is on the edge of the panel, very much looking like a step pyramid. Just a bit overkill, isn't it, for trying to prevent mudslides? I mean, really? This structure right here with very interesting, like, knots dug out of the sides. A whole video just on this thing here. I also thought it was interesting for all of you Legend of Zelda fans that the Triforce appears to have been originated in orders of magnitude. So that sort of gives you an idea there. How true it is, who knows, but that's what they say. So it is certainly no sort of feat of engineering to scoff at, even if it was done in the early 1900s, as they say, but I beg to differ, and we'll see why here in just a minute. Or you probably already know why, but... Okay, so descent of a star fort. If you guys have looked into the star forts at all, they can be found all over the world. It may very well be a remnant of one. But this is a pretty impressive structure here, Fort San Lorenzo. And let's see it, get a map of it, because I did have it up on maps. Oh, that's right. I think that I had to reload it, so let's just do map. Fort San Lorenzo. Few miles from that channel. Now, one thing that I noticed I wanted to focus on real quick is these you call them jetties, but just appearing really quite ancient, man. I mean, from an overhead view, I'd really love to see what these look like on the ground, but so basically, and you can't get any sort of, you can't drop the man around 1,000 foot. So this goes on for quite miles, man. At least, well, at least a mile or two. Let me zoom in even further because it's just so interesting how that you've got this road, Butner Street, that comes up to here in a cul-de-sac, and then you've got this jetty that just juts out into the ocean for miles. Functionally, if you're going to have a ship come in here, you've got to come through where they go. So militarily, that is an interesting or strategic thing to have there. But just a marvel. I mean, whether they early 1900s or whenever, who knows when this was actually completed, according to what I'm trying to convey here to you guys. But just a marvel just to have these jetties going for miles out into the ocean, man. That's pretty amazing. Pretty damn amazing. Now, there's other in here too, like, let's see if I can find it on this slide without going to my other one. Let's see, where is it? I'll probably miss it by now. Well, maybe I'll find it on. Yeah, there's a really old road to nowhere out in the middle of these jungles here that I found earlier, and I thought it was pretty interesting because it doesn't have any sort of name, like road names associated with it or anything. And I thought it was close to these jetties. Where did it go? Well, now, of course, I won't find it. I had it on another thing queued up, but I think I had to reload it. So let's see. Was it over here? But anyway, there was a very old unmarked road cut straight through this jungle, and it just had the telltale signs of very high level engineering, but it appeared to be completely unused. So definitely interesting. Maybe I'll run into it on another one of these slides. But was it here? Was it this one? But yeah, Fort San Lorenzo. Very interesting. Yeah, I'll probably never find that one particular. Wasn't that important. I just thought it was kind of interesting. And well, wait a minute. I mean, it looked kind of like this here, but it went on for many miles, and it had very very straight cuts to it. So that's what it looks more like a river. And get into all the history about that, but it is very very old and again reminiscent of the star forts that we're used to seeing all over. We do have all the remnants of this. Come out and say it. Tartarian worldwide civilization, even in Panama. Look at these massive cornerstones. I mean, these are very very large blocks here that they're building with out in the middle. Right by the Panama Canal. How old is this? I'd love to look into the official narrative in terms of how old this fort is, but it is, it's the same sort of architectural style we find all over the world with these sort of star fort places, isn't it? There's even a stone dome of these towers. It's very very awesome. get some scale, you see those people sitting out there on the beach. And look at these giant doors. I mean, is it really necessary to have, like, what, 15-foot tall doors? I don't know, man. Maybe it was. Maybe you could just build shit with stone back then and it didn't cost you much, but we can't do it today. I mean, look, that's what, 6-foot tall guy, a 12, 15-foot tall door? Is that really necessary? I mean, we certainly don't build doors today. So what does that imply? You know? Think about it. So that's basically that, but there you go, some cannons there. Yeah. So we can close that one. My RAM is thanking me. Oh, and I know why I had these pictures of obelisks. Let's go back to Google Maps one time. Oh, I can find this again. If I can find the canal again, where is it? Come on. Wow, I'm like way off. Okay, here we go. So we're over here at like the north side of the Panama Canal, and what I found interesting, if I can find it again. Yeah, I think it was right at the end where these jetties are. Here we go. Here it is right here. Now, either that's a lighthouse or my tripping or is an obelisk. Um, and again, this is on Butner Street. To me, that looks exactly like an obelisk. Maybe it is a lighthouse. I don't know. I mean, if you look at the shadow of the thing and the image of the thing, it does appear to have that sort of pyramidal shape at the top. Now, if you Google search for obelisks on Butner Street in Panama, I can't find anything that looks like this. But there are apparently tons of obelisks in Panama, so wouldn't be surprising that there is an obelisk out there in the middle of nowhere on Butner Street, right by those miles-long jetties. Yeah. So I guess let's see. I don't even know how long we've been on. 110 minutes, almost 2 hours. Good. I guess I'm going to wrap this up. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Oh, Daryl Davis, thank you, sir. God bless you, man. Appreciate you. Super chat there. I just but I do want to thank you guys for joining and watching. And if you'd like to help support this channel, you can do so through PayPal or Patreon. I'll put links in the description. Just be on the lookout for the next stream. I'll be doing Flat Earth and revisiting and scrutinizing historical narratives as soon as possible. What better way to spend the afternoon than with friends and truth, right? So love you guys. Y'all have a blessed day, and we'll see you in the next stream. Take it easy, everybody.